Okay, so it comes down to this idea of your attitude. So attitudes is an important thing to understand when we relate it to behavior, because your behavior comes as a consequence of your attitude. So you've got your implicit and your explicit attitudes. So again, it's very much in the name. So your implicit is kind of, you're not really thinking about it consciously, whereas your explicit attitudes are a little bit more deliberate. So your implicit attitudes, this idea of being involuntarily formed and difficult to self-report, you can't even really comprehend the attitude, if that makes sense. That's why it's implicit. Whereas your explicit attitudes, maybe I hate, I don't know, peanut butter or something like that. That idea of those explicit attitudes that you're very aware of are different to implicit attitudes. And implicit attitudes might be, something perhaps like a little bit more serious than, my opinions on food or something like that. So with your attitudes, you can see on this diagram on the left, we have our ABCs, and this is a recurring thing that comes up in Psych units 1 through to 4. This idea of your affective, your behavioral, and your cognitive, these sort of components. In this setting, we look at how it forms an attitude. So affective refers to your sort of emotions and your feelings. Behavioral, obviously your behavior. Cognitive, sort of things that you're thinking of, and how these form an attitude. So your emotions and your thoughts and sort of your feelings will obviously influence your attitude. Your behavior towards certain things, again, this has that sort of relationship. It almost has a little bit of a two-way street with your attitude, because your attitude influences your behavior influences your attitude as well. And then cognitive, obviously, so like kind of actual formed opinions and decisions and things like that, and how that forms your attitude as well. So hopefully that makes sense. So we've got this attitude, we've got this sort of perspective in our head, and it's this idea of what is required to translate this attitude into a behavior. So we look at 4 things. The first is the strength of the attitude. So it's pretty intuitive, this idea that if you've got a really strong attitude, you are more likely to express that behavior. So if you if you've got like a strong attitude towards climate change or something like that, then you'll be more likely to demonstrate behavior that's linked to that. You might be more more inclined to join like a club at uni or something like that, or more inclined to run a campaign, something along those lines. Whereas if you have a weak attitude, so maybe, you don't care about it that much, you're probably less likely to be inclined to join a club. It's all those sorts of things, and that can go for like any other club in the world. The social context of your attitude, so this idea of if you were to display this behavior and sort of emulate this attitude, what the result would be. So if it's something that's illegal, you're probably less likely to do it. If it's something you might perceive as, it might make you an outcast, you might be less likely to do it. That sort of stuff. It's sort of how appropriate your attitude is in a certain context. Number 3, we're looking at the accessibility of the attitude. So this might sound a little strange, but it's basically this idea of how easy the thought comes to mind almost. So this idea of how easily your attitude is expressed. So again, if we're going with the climate change thing, this idea of, if someone is discussing it or if the topic comes up, you really instantly always think of this specific attitude that you have on it. Again, that sort of links to strength in this idea about how almost passionate you are about something. Whereas if we're discussing a topic of, climate change, and you don't really care, like maybe you're the opinion that like, oh yeah, you think it should be, something should be done about it, doesn't really come to mind as quickly. It's this idea of that accessibility. And then the last thing is your perceived control over your behavior. Be mindful, this isn't like, like self-control, but it's this idea about if the behavior is actually going to be meaningful. So again, if it's this idea on climate change, is me joining a club actually going to be beneficial? Is it going to do anything for the cause, that sort of thing? So it's that idea about, should this attitude become a behavior? Is this behavior actually going to be, is there a reason for me to display this behavior? Basically is the idea.